Welcome in, everybody. It's another edition of Orange and Blue Today. It is Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason, of course, Mace at Indianapolis, the NFL Scouting Combine, and you see that beautiful thumbnail. We got to talk tight ends today, Mace. It's the Combine, baby. It's Indy. We know the Broncos talking to some tight ends. Mace, you're in Indianapolis. Gone over some of the names. OBT2 coming up tonight. We're going to dive deep into these tight ends. We have two specifically. One we've talked about plenty. Another one maybe a little bit newer to the conversation. But Mace, you're in Indy. How you feeling today, man?
I'm all right. Just need to get a little nap a little while ago. So,
well, you know the Combine, and you've done it so many times. It's kind of a whirlwind, dude. It's like late nights, early mornings, late nights, early mornings. And for you, it's constant work.
You have to steal what sleep you can where you can. So it's just get in the room. It's like, okay, can I get like 45 minutes to take a nap here? And it was 45 minutes to nap that felt like 2 hours at least. But anyway, we talked a bit about Max Klare of Ohio State last week, and we're going to talk about him again. But the theme of the day here, you're always looking for patterns in terms of who the Broncos are talking to. You're not going to get an indication of what they're going to do, who they're going to pick necessarily.
Right.
And it's because it's too early in the process. They're getting to know these guys. The coaches specifically are getting to know them. The scouts obviously know them really well, and thus George Payton, for example, has a pretty good familiarity with what he's looking at. But for the coaches, it's a real chance to kind of get to know these guys as they start to make their evals and start to decide who they want. And so it's really significant. The Broncos, every team's got a limit on the number of players they can talk to in terms of they get their 15 minutes, boom, 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 with each player, and that at least 6 tight ends. We know of 6 tight ends who had formal meetings with the Denver Broncos here in Indianapolis, leading off with Kenyon Sadiq and Max Klare. Kenyon Sadiq is the only tight end that you're talking about going potentially in the first round, unlike last year where you had Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren in round 1. But their search is going well into the draft. And I thought it was interesting that the tight ends that they're interviewing here definitely are bunched in that second to third round range. Like, for example, Tanner Koziol, a guy that we've talked about from the University of Houston.
Favorite of mine.
6'7" length, guy who can get it done in the red zone. The Broncos have met with him, but it's not happening here. It happened down at Mobile with the contingent that they had down there at the Senior Bowl. So the formal meeting isn't happening. There was a point of contact, but it happened last month. Here, they're looking, and of course, Koziol, you're talking about if he gets drafted, it's going to probably be in that back half of round 5 to round 6 to round 7. The Broncos, their focus here is on those tight ends in late day 1 and then on into day 2 range. And also thought, it was funny because the one guy that we didn't hear from until later in the day, we heard from all of them coming through, but some were a little delayed. Like, for example, Kenyon Sadiq was about an hour delayed getting into the interview room, the media room, to talk to him. So,
yeah.
But the last tight end to come in the room was Eli Stowers of Vanderbilt, and he confirmed he'd had a formal interview with the Broncos as well, which I thought was interesting, Cease, because all the other tight ends you're talking about are tight ends that can project long term to be guys who can go in line next to the tackle as well as be moved around. Whereas Eli Stowers, as you and I know, strictly a guy who is in space to being lined up wide. So at first I was thinking, the focus is guys that can potentially go in line, that can be aligned in an inline spot. And then they're also talking Eli Stowers as well, who's very much simply a in space / outside aligned tight end. So they're looking at basically everybody. They're looking at pretty much everybody in that day 1, day 2 discussion.
Yeah, and Stowers, a pure F tight end. We're going to get more into him on tonight's program, bring up Chad Ryder's mock draft. I'm so jealous you got to see Chad today. But either way, let's start with the guy that everybody knows we're going to talk about. It is one Kenyon Sadiq. There's the Oregon logo. We know that they spent some time together with the Ducks. Got the glasses on. He's ready to go, ready to impress. And Mace says, we're bringing you in here to talk about what Kenyon Sadiq said today. I look at it and I go, I'm seeing a lot of people say, well, yeah, but he's not a Tyler Warren. He's not a Brock Bowers. He's the number 1 tight end this year, but he's not blank. I don't really like that at all in the conversation. First off, nobody's Brock Bowers. Secondly, Tyler Warren's just kind of his own player as well. Kenyon Sadiq is clearly the best tight end in this draft class. I believe he'll be in the top 20 somewhere, probably, let's say 17 to 25, somewhere in that range, meaning the Broncos would have to move up for him. But certainly a guy with a lot to prove, even saying he's going to work out. Is that right, Mace? He
said he's going to do the full workout here on Friday. Wants to show off. He didn't want to give a time on the 40. He stopped short of that.
Okay.
He very much was a guy that wanted to show off a little bit, but was holding back in terms of just putting a specific time down. But he was excited to get out, sounded excited to go out there and show what he could do, which is in contrast to a lot of guys when they come to this process nowadays. He wants to kind of go out there and cement himself. So, I mean, if he runs a good 40, it certainly it cements his case. I mean, the thing that he's going to be able to do right away and do well is be that seam ripper type of tight end.
Yeah.
And he talked at length about the variety of routes he has run that he feels he can run immediately. He talked a lot about blocking technique, about what he feels he has to do to improve at the next level. The thing that he didn't say in terms of improvement, he focused more on technique improvement than getting in the weight room. And so that's kind of interesting, because I think down the line with Kenyon Sadiq, the thing that may reveal itself is that to become the true all-around tight end and the guy who also aligns in that inline position is he may need to add, say, 3 to 5 pounds of muscle at some point, because the technique is there, the willingness is there, but at the same time, he probably has to bulk up just a little bit to handle what he would need to handle on the inside. But that's not something he has to do necessarily right away. And if let's say the Broncos add David Njoku in free agency, if they did, he wouldn't have to play that kind of role immediately. Right. He could operate more in space now and work his way up to the more full and robust role that would also have him going in line.
Yeah, and we look at Kenyon Sadiq. If he has a great combine, I'm glad you used the word cement. If he does what we expect him to, and the combine, for a lot of teams is just dotting I's, crossing T's. But it's fine. Yeah. It's an important part of the process. We support fully. We don't call it the Underwear Olympics. I know others do. If Sadiq has...
That was his term. Oh. That was Foxy's term. Okay. Yeah, Underwear Olympics.
There you go, Foxy. So if Sadiq has the combine that we expect him to, I think what you said is correct. It cements him. It cements him there, 17 to 25. If you want to fudge the numbers a little bit, sure. If he has a great combine, like dazzles us, I'm not saying he gets out of the range, because going from 30 to 20 is going to take a little doing. I don't think he necessarily goes out of the range of the Denver Broncos, Mace. But we also know that, if it's the combine talk, I'll bring up John Ross, right? We've seen guys just blow teams away, and then all of a sudden they go from like what was John Ross before he ran that 40? You know, a second round pick, and he goes in the top 10. Now Sadiq should work out better than John Ross did, but it's like there's a line where if he's over that line, might move him where it's even more difficult for the Broncos to get him.
And probably out of the Broncos' range, I'd say, if that happens, because I don't think the Broncos are going to overreact to a workout. Because even if he dazzles in that workout, to me, the right range for him is still somewhere in the back half of the first round. Because if you stacked him against the tight ends last year, he'd be tight end 3. Because the ceilings, there is a high ceiling with him. Yes. But he's not Colston Loveland, and he's not Tyler Warren.
Right.
But I'd say in part because there's definitely that willingness to get inside, and you can look over the horizon and project him working inside as well. I think that's something that maybe separates him from a few other of those tight ends last year, and having done it on a consistent basis at Oregon, and I don't think it hurts him that he was, behind Terrence Ferguson, for example, that he's in a place that just, developed a tight end who, didn't get on the field maybe as much as expected, but did do some positive things for the Rams last year. Yeah. So, and that he's been around. He will have been around two true pro quality quarterbacks. I mean, and then Dylan Gabriel in between, who has gotten a shot, but didn't really do as much as, say, right. Bo Nix, for example. But there's a lot to like about Kenyon Sadiq, but he's not as complete as those two guys that went early in last year's draft. That's why, to me, the 20s represents the right spot for him. And if he has the dazzling workout and moves it and does go up, I imagine the Broncos would say, all right, that's fine. Someone's going to take him in that range. We'll probably stand pat and look elsewhere when it comes to what they're going to do for the draft. I mean, for example, they did, we get into the tight ends, and, Eli Stowers they talked to, Max Klare they talked to, Oscar Delp out of Georgia. There's that they talked to him. He's an interesting guy because kind of similar to Kenyon Sadiq. You don't look at the numbers over the career and say, wow. Now with Sadiq, he emerged as a tight end 1 and had a pretty good season this past year. Oscar Delp, you can't look at his season like that, but there's enough with him that you're probably talking about him going on day 2 of this draft. And so there's, they're definitely making sure they're covered no matter what ends up happening. But, certainly they have a little bit more information on Sadiq than maybe other teams, because they can certainly just ask Bo, hey, what do you think? And Bo's a great resource to have because he saw Kenyon Sadiq practice day in, day out, threw to him day in, day out. And boy, Kenyon Sadiq would really, really like to be reunited with Bo Nix. Yes, he said it would be awesome. That was his word, to be back with Bo Nix. And it doesn't surprise me because pass catching targets like familiarity.
Yes.
With the quarterback.
And so they like quarterbacks that throw catchable passes like Bo Nix.
So I think that was one of those things that you can chalk up to. I've worked with him. I know him. If I went to Denver, things would turn out just fine because I've got that past background with him.
Yep. And that's the thing. If you got sick of broadcasters saying Troy Franklin went to Oregon with Bo Nix ad nauseum,
get ready. You get a lot more of that with Sadiq if he came in. I mean, that would. I mean, actually, if they drafted Sadiq, then a huge story would be that on any given play, 2 of the guys that Bo looked to would be players that were teammates of his in college.
Yeah.
And I think if you'd actually have to imagine that, if it worked out if the Broncos drafted Sadiq and it worked out, and hey, Troy Franklin, for all the ups and downs, had a pretty solid second season last year when you step back and look at the totality of the production.
Sure.
And you'd say, all right, they've gotten something out of that. I mean, and Franklin was a 4th round pick, not a 2nd round pick, 4th round pick. His production as a 4th round pick in the first couple of years, it's actually right there. It's actually pretty solid for a draft pick at that level at this stage in his career. Not a bust, as some people would probably say.
Oh, no, not at all whatsoever. And with Kenyon Sadiq, it's that familiarity. It's being awesome. Cue the Lego movie, right? Everything is awesome. It would be pretty awesome to see. And I think people got tripped out, and Broncos country certainly got excited, Mace, about the quote of Kenyon Sadiq saying it would be awesome, and just kind of knowing him. And that's a point of conversation as well. When you know what a guy likes to do, where he likes to put the football, it's symbiotic. People always say it's on the other side of it, like, hey, you know, Troy Franklin knows what Bo Nix likes. Well, Kenyon Sadiq also said, I know what he likes, you know, and that's also part of the conversation. It's both sides here. And like, I know where you want the ball. You know where I want to put the ball. Now let's go make plays.
At the same time, as we know, Cease, it didn't necessarily help Troy Franklin get everything that maybe everyone wanted out of his rookie season, right? Because one thing that did happen was, despite the familiarity, I think that rookie season was probably a bit of a disappointment because it seemed like they weren't on the same page. So there's just because you do have that familiarity is not necessarily a guarantee that it's all going to be there immediately. So I would say it certainly can work out long term, no doubt. But I'd say, you know, the Troy Franklin rookie season kind of provides some evidence that there can still be a transition, and a bumpy transition at that.
Yeah, and a tight end, it usually takes a little bit of time. And by a little bit of time, I mean 3 years. Sometimes you can make an impact quickly. Sometimes it takes a little bit. Tight end, you got to learn a lot. So,
which is why I don't think I don't think what happens in free agency necessarily changes the plan at tight end. I mean, except the only thing is, as we saw last year, maybe turns it from a must to a need, which means that if the draft board falls one way, then maybe they don't end up adding a tight end. But I do think after last year, though, they are probably looking to add to the position that they'll say, okay, we got to maybe make sure that we fortify this with a young guy this time in a way that we weren't able to last year. And you do hear playmakers, but they're happy with the wide receiver. So, you know, this does feel like a running back and tight end draft if they're adding to the skill positions. And actually, our friend Luca Evans reporting that they have met with some running backs here at the Combine, including a guy that we've talked about, you know, Kadarian Price from Notre Dame. So
yep, and my favorite, Jonah Coleman, they've met with. So I've done a little bit of dance of joy on that. Do you want the dance of joy about Kenyon Sadiq? Let us know in the comments down below. Hey, Sadiq's the guy. I want him in the first round. You got to move up. Maybe you say we talk about Kenyon Sadiq too much. Either way, let us know. Feed the algorithm and drop a comment down below. It is Orange and Blue today with Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason, and talking about the other tight end, Ohio State, Max Klare. We've got to jump into this conversation as well, Mace, because Max Klare was talked to by the Broncos. Again, on OBT2, we're diving into everybody a lot deeper. But on this time around, Mace, let's talk about Klare here and, you know, what he is. I love the fact that he's a former quarterback. And, you know, I know RJ Harvey was as well. But for me, with a receiver or a tight end, I love former quarterbacks because they know where to go. They know how to find a soft spot in a zone. They know how to square up to the line of scrimmage. It's not just run a route. It's not just get open. It's also presenting the largest target to your quarterback, squaring to the line of scrimmage, coming back to the ball. A former quarterback's going to know these little nuances that a lot of college receivers and tight ends just don't know because they didn't play the position. And usually in college, they just out-athlete guys. You got a guy like Max Klare. He is an F tight end, a willing blocker. Blocking needs work, but he's a guy that can make plays, maybe not like Kenyon Sadiq, but still be that move tight end to attack the middle of the field.
someone that has the ability to get open, has the ability to make some plays, and I thought and had a pretty good upward trajectory, I think, over the course of his career as well, and eventually making that transfer. I think it's interesting you mentioned the quarterback background in terms of developing as a pass catcher in the NFL, because you take another guy the Broncos added recently who was a quarterback at one point in his football development. That's R.J. Harvey. And he had some pass catching skills, but not as many chances to show them off when he was in college.
Right.
So the Broncos were making a bit of a projection off of relatively limited repetitions and opportunities that he had as a receiving target. And if you look at R.J. Harvey's season and say, okay, what is the area in which he showed that he already belongs in the NFL? It was as a pass catcher, and it was as being what the quarterback needs. I mean, basically the only thing you want to clean up on that part is the drop rate, but everything else in terms of what he did as a receiving target was basically what you wanted. And it's why, you get that blocking up a little bit, and I think that is the leap that you expect to see as you go from year 1 to year 2. He has the body type to certainly do it. Then I think you'll see the growth there. But I think I would look at RJ being ready to go as a pass catcher, the quarterback background, and I'd say you could probably apply that to Max Klare as well right away. And I think you can also say some of the same things about his early contribution, as you say about Kenyon Sadiq, that his first real impact is going to be in space. It's going to be as as that wide tight end operating on his own, rather than the guy who's aligned next to the tackle. That's something that's going to have to come in a couple of years, perhaps. And it's why I think if they sign David again, I'll come back to Njoku, but he probably is a good fit for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that in all likelihood, if you draft a tight end, the skill that they're going to need the most time in terms of being brought up to speed is working in an inline alignment.
Yeah.
And Njoku would allow you time to bring that tight end up to speed on that.
Yep. And unlike Stowers, who's just a guy that's slot and wide, with Max Klare, again, he's willing inside. He's willing as an inline guy, and you appreciate that. And I look at Klare to Sadiq in that comparison, Mace. Okay, we'll see what happens with Evan Ingram here. We'll see what happens with David Njoku in free agency. I love Isaiah Likely as well. Mm-hmm. But it's like, if you get a Max Klare in the second round, he's not a first-round option. Everybody knows that. But if you get Max Klare in the second round, I think there's a little bit more time. You get Kenyon Sadiq in the first round, you're going to want him out there making plays with Ingram, without Ingram, whatever. You want Sadiq on the field. I think with Klare, he's going to make plays in space, as you mentioned, but he also might have a little bit more of an on-ramp because he is willing to be that inline blocker. Yeah, and I think also just the natural expectation of a second-round pick compared to a first-round pick. In general, I mean, you're not asking why isn't the second-round pick on the field as often as you're asking the first-round pick, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, look at Jahdae Barron and how often that question came up last year. Why isn't Jahdae Barron out there? Is there something wrong with Jahdae Barron? Blah, 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 blah. Ferguson earlier, and it's like Ferguson, when Tyler Higbee was healthy, Ferguson wasn't out there. But if we look at the Bears with Colston Loveland, there were times when you're like, why is Cole Kmet getting work? You have Colston Loveland. Tyler Warren's a different story. But, like, if Max Klare is a second-rounder, I think he's got a runway here. Yes. I think if it's Max Klare, I think if it's Oscar Delp, I think if it's Eli Stowers, they've got runways. Now, I think Stowers is probably a bit more developed in terms of the specific role that he would have. So I think he probably would get out there. The other thing to kind of put in the back in your back pocket, of course, is what does happen with Evan Ingram going forward and what his role ends up being as well. I think Eli Stowers would probably mean perhaps
a move does come on Evan Ingram. These other players we're talking about, I think, at least in year one, certainly there's the possibility of coexisting with Evan Ingram and a tight end and being in that tight end room. Remember, there's a good chance the Broncos end up keeping 4 tight ends on the 53. That's, you go back to last year, right? And it was Adkins, it was Kroll, it was Troutman, it was Ingram. So there's definitely room for 4 tight ends, including a draft pick on this year's roster as well.
Definitely room for growth on our YouTube channel, Mace. And we got OBT2 coming up tonight, so everyone make sure to stay tuned for that. There'll be a live show. Jump in the live chat with us, OBT2, during Combine Week. We'll talk more in depth about these tight ends. But as we look to grow and build our YouTube channel with these goals that are ever high in the sky, and we appreciate that, but we need some people to help us out here on YouTube. Andrew Mason, how can folks do just that?
Like,
comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell
so that you
never
miss
vid.
That's right. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials. He's at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammey saying OBT is a BFD. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Stay tuned, and would you please stay frosty.